Joining me now is independent journalist Ken Klippenstein. He is an authority and a good friend of the show, and it's good to see you, sir.
Hey, good to be back.
So Ken, you and I were just talking a little bit. I think it would be very useful for the audience. I went over already the aerial photographs and others that show the stunning Secret Service failure at the Trump rally that led to the attempted assassination. But let's take a step back and actually go through everything that this agency has failed on just in the last decade or so, which really give us a picture. And you wrote a little bit about this. Let's put this up there on the screen. You wrote how the Secret Service missed the Trump shooter and why we are going to be blamed for it. So Ken, let's go back a little bit in time, and just from your memory alone, tell us about some of the failures inside the Secret Service to set up a culture of incompetence that led to this incident.
Yeah, this is a culture that people that have worked in the agency have tried to draw attention to. There was a report just last night that a bunch of Secret Service agents got together and are trying to send a letter, I believe, to Congress to try to address some of these problems. I would encourage anybody curious about the agency and in disbelief about their ability to drop the ball on something like this, as indeed many liberals, at least on Twitter, were within hours of the shooting. One of the top trending terms on Twitter, if not the top trending term, was the word staged, the belief that the shooting was staged, which I think speaks to the lack of understanding people have for how many scandals that this agency has been embroiled in. In the course of my reporting on it, looking back at many of the scandals that I've just read peripherally from following the news, I stumbled across my own report about their deletion of January 6th text messages that were unable to be obtained by Congress. And this was just something I forgot because I come across so many of these different things. And so, I mean, this is a scandal-plagued agency that has deep, deep cultural problems that proceed by a long shot what happened this weekend, which was a shooter being able to get within several hundred feet of the president and able to situate himself on top of a roof with an AR-style rifle. And the fact that the Secret Service was not able to clear that. Now, it wasn't within the direct range that the crowd was. They're supposed to pass them all through a magnometer that checks for metal objects, weapons. But, there's a lot of, I've been seeing in the discourse, a lot of debate over, this was local law enforcement's responsibility. Well, that's just moving the goalposts, because the whole point of an agency like this is to be able to anticipate problems like this so that you don't have to farm it out to local law enforcement, which isn't going to have the resources or training necessarily to be able to respond to these things. So that's kind of the context behind all of this.
That's exactly right. We actually have the video. I mean, this is one of the craziest videos where you have an individual in the immediate aftermath, a witness, telling the BBC about how he tried desperately to alert the police, local law enforcement, and others that there was a gunman on the rooftop in the 2 minutes or so before the shooting. He was not the only person who noticed him. There's been multiple other video evidence of showing people begging law enforcement, saying that person is up there and he has a gun. Let's take a listen to that interview.
We noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, hey man, there's guy on the roof with a rifle. And the police were like, huh, what? Like they didn't know what was going on. We're like, hey, right here on the roof, we can see him from right here. We see him. He's crawling. And next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for 2-3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots ring out.
So you're certain that the shots came from that guy on the roof?
100%. 100%.
And he was up there for a couple of minutes?
He was up there.
You saw him up there for a couple of minutes?
Absolutely. At least 3 to 4 minutes.
And you were telling the police and the Secret Service?
We were telling the police. We were pointing at him for the Secret Service, who were looking at us from the top of the barn. They were looking at us the whole time when we were standing by that tree.
Could they see
binoculars?
Could they see him?
Probably not, because the roof, the way the slope went, he was behind where they could see. But why is there not Secret Service on all of these roofs here?
Yeah, I mean, this random guy sees a guy 3 to 4 minutes, he's saying, before the shooting, Ken. So just take us through what that reveals about the failure in that, quote, middle tier of the perimeter. That's what it's being described to us.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that this is not an urban setting. There were not a number of buildings that would have been difficult to clear. This was one of the only buildings in the vicinity, so it would not have been hard to clear. And in fact, it's been reported that a member of local law enforcement actually climbed up a ladder and saw this guy and pointed it, but then the shooter pointed his weapon at him and then he fled. This is exactly the reason that you need a specialized force that can be trained to respond to high stress situations like this. We can criticize that member of local law enforcement all we want, but they might not be trained for those kinds of high pressure situations. And so that's why so if you look at the Secret Service's response, once the shooting began, then the response was very quick. What this was an intelligence failure. And what's interesting about that is if you look at just exactly 1 week prior to the shooting, there was an interview that went pretty unnoticed with George Stephanopoulos of ABC who was interviewing the director of Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, and he brought up in a question that looks really prophetic now, and I would encourage people to look that up. He brought up specifically the question of polarization and political extremism within the country in the context of the election, and asked her if she thought that this was going to be something to be concerned about, and she gave the most just token answer where she said, quote, it's definitely something we look into. And that was all she had to say about it. And this is an agency that we've allocated all this money to. Earlier this year, the intelligence community put out its first ever what's called open source intelligence strategy. And this was signed by both the CIA director and the director of national intelligence. And the document says that they want to make this the primary means of intelligence collection. And what's so interesting about this case is that it's a real stress test of that idea, and it fails because as far as we know, this kid wasn't on social media. And so all this money that we're throwing into these gee whiz technology to try to hoover up all this information from social media platforms, use AI and all sorts of algorithms that private companies, frankly, can make a lot of money off of, failed to catch this guy and are going to fail to catch the next lone wolf who's described as a loner, because those people are not online. It's a failure of the system that we increasingly rely on to collect intelligence, because there are all sorts of ways that threats behave that aren't going to leave that kind of digital exhaust.
Right. And to take it, just again back, is you don't need to do all of that. You could actually just do your job at a very basic level, and then you could have prevented this entire thing. The only headline that should have come out is crazy guy, arrested at Trump rally with a gun outside, not even at Trump rally, outside the Trump rally with a gun. Shouldn't have even been able to get anywhere near the rooftop, not let alone break off shots. Now you're highlighting a very important thing here, which is that local law enforcement actually confronted this person on the rooftop, and apparently the gunman pointed his rifle at him. The guy retreated, and in that moment of retreat is exactly when the shots broke off towards Trump. I could possibly have saved Trump's life in that he would probably not, he didn't feel like he was in or he was rushing the shots in that moment. At the very least, still a little bit of a Uvalde situation. Now, as you said, to be fair, perhaps not trained, probably shocked that something like this happened, but still very surprising. We also know a little bit about the failure here, is that allegedly this rooftop was known as a, quote, well-known high-priority vulnerability. Here's a, quote, senior Secret Service source telling that to NBC News. Let's take a listen. I want to get your reaction.
And at this hour, we do have some new information for you. A senior Secret Service source familiar with the planning of yesterday's event tells NBC News that the roof where the shooter was located was a well-known high-priority vulnerability. It was identified just the day before during a security walkthrough. We've also just learned that there were 2 counter-sniper teams on site and that the counter-sniper did not need approval to shoot. One source telling NBC News that prior protocols were not followed. The FBI now says the alleged shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, appears to have acted alone. This all provides new context for the shocking scene last night in Butler, Pennsylvania.
So they're saying, Ken, that this was a well-known priority, vulnerability. There was nobody there. There was no barricade or anything. We also, Susan Crabtree over at Real Clear Politics, she's reporting that the Secret Service counter-snipers only had some 24 hours to secure the scene, which is very contrary to procedure. So, the failures on this individual level are just stunning from what we're learning so far.
And what's particularly surprising to me is how long-standing the complaints on the part. I know former Secret Service that described the lack of resources, not as a whole, because as I was describing, there's investment in all kinds of fancy gadgets, but in the specifics of what they actually need. And you can find no shortage of, op-eds books and interviews of former Secret Service agents describing these problems. So in so many ways, this is almost like a 9/11 kind of event because we had so many warnings prior to it and a total failure, bipartisan failure on the part of both parties to respond to this and not just surge resources, but surge resources specific to what the people that do the job need. And, a lot of these people I'm criticizing the institution, the agency, because the people that take the oath, it's a very serious oath. They're willing to put themselves in harm's way. The ones that I know seem to take it seriously. And to the extent there are going to be efforts to try to throw individuals under the bus, just completely misses the point, because this is an institutional failure that needs to be responded to in a way that ameliorates whatever the systemic failure was.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and let's be clear here. Like you said, there are people who literally stormed the stage and jumped on top of the president. You've got the counter sniper who immediately takes out the shooter with, a couple of seconds notice. This is not in any way to denigrate their work. It's to say that at an institutional and leadership, level, this was obviously a glaring failure. And let's talk a little bit about that culture now of incompetence. Just in the last couple of years, we had the news just 2 months ago that the head of Kamala Harris's Secret Service detail had some sort of mental breakdown, apparently causing a lot of strife within the agency. In May, we had the news that a petition is circulating within the agency saying that people were not receiving adequate training and that they were worried about insider threats. Then you also talked about the January 6th failure there, and also the cover-up that happened with text messages from some of the agents. I mean, we're talking here, Ken, and that's just 3 things in the last year or a couple of years that tell us about what's going on.
Yeah, you can go back to the Obama administration, and as I recall, there was a case where they were soliciting hookers in Colombia.
That's right, in Colombia.
And so, and I was doing research on this, and we were joking about this before we went on camera. I just stumbled across my own reporting, which I had forgotten, which was the deletion of the January 6th text messages, which would have been central to providing a important window into what exactly happened that day. And so what's frustrating to me about these national security failures from 9/11 to January 6th and all the things in between is the extent to which the public ends up getting blamed for things. And in none of those cases are high-level officials ever punished. In the case of 9/11, all the intelligence that they had, the failure to share it, nobody was fired for that, much less the kind of institutional changes that are going to prevent something like that. So I would, I really hope that in the response and the justified outrage on the part of the public, that this is pointed at the right things and and doesn't become the usual partisan football, so that we can prevent something like this from happening again.
One of the things I want to get your reaction to, we finally have the first statement from the head of the Secret Service. And in her statement, she says at the very end that she is confident. She says confident, which I'm not sure how she can say this, in the security plan that our Secret Service RNC coordinator and our partners have put in place, which we have reviewed and strengthened in the wake of Saturday's shooting. And there's no, taking responsibility inside of this, Ken. There's just, we take the responsibility protecting him seriously. We're going to do a review, et cetera, and all of that. But we have not heard from her. And actually, yesterday, there was a press conference by the Secret Service about Milwaukee and the RNC. They wouldn't answer a single question about the attempted assassination. So it feels like there is a real cover-up, at least being attempted, of trying to move past this, but I don't think they can. I mean, this is too high profile of an incident that's happened here.
Yeah, this is going to be an impossible situation to ignore. But I think the important thing, as the saying goes, never let a crisis go to waste. And boy, was this a crisis. I mean, we may not get another opportunity like this, God willing. And if we do, it might look a lot worse. So they're really going to need to respond in a way that is not what we've seen so far, which is immediately afterwards. Even President Trump, the great critic of the so-called deep state, the national security community, immediately thanked them. Now, again, I have respect for the rank and file individuals, but to say nothing of the institutional failure, I think says a lot. And it goes back to a point I was trying to make at the beginning of the interview, which is that because of the mystique and because of Hollywood and because of people's impressions of the national security community, I think it's really hard for people to believe, much less understand, that these are fallible agencies just like anything else, and that it's a lot less like a James Bond movie than it is like any job that you're familiar with where things go wrong and people make mistakes and things are dysfunctional. So this is a really important moment not to just defer to, what do I know about the national? Well, let's trust the experts. No, you know what you saw here. Everybody saw it. What you saw was pretty much what happened.
And that is actually what the scary part, right? Because that could embolden some crazy individuals out there who are like, wait, it's this easy? Like you said, they believed Hollywood. They believed this is good. This entire thing was just a crime of opportunity. Yes, you had a crazy person, but I mean, at the end of the day, he lived 40 minutes away. He says, I'm gonna go and try and kill the president, at least from what we can see right now. In a normal situation, he gets arrested, walking to that place with the gun, and boom, he's going to jail. You're never gonna hear about his name again, and everybody just gets to move on. But because of the systemic failure after failure after failure, being able to get onto the rooftop, being able to put shots off, then killing an individual in the crowd and almost killing the former president, now it is a national scandal. And you think, how could something like this ever happen? So that's really well said about how also I think that the eventual response here is going to try and shift the blame to the public. They're going to increase the national security state the same way that they did after 9/11, but without solving for the basics, which is everybody just here does their job the same way they did. And people were saying, oh, why weren't there any drones? You don't even need a drone to do something like this. Just barricade the rooftop off. Now, sure, use the drone if you need to, but we don't need to blow hundreds of billions of dollars, on expansion of technology. You just need to learn how to basic competence of what we're doing. And we'll look to you, Ken, in the coming days about some more news about the investigation and more, but we appreciate your analysis here, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Saagar.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.